6 running backs that we cannot stop drafting. That, you know what, some people may say we just have too much of them on our teams. But Tyler, we're going to dive right in and just let the people know who they should be adding to their team, who they should be targeting at the running back position. So why don't you kick us off with your guy?
This is a guy that I have talked about on many an episode so far this summer. And I may or may not have called him early, an early flag plant for the season, but it's Isiah Pacheco. The fact is, the end of last season for Isiah Pacheco signaled to me that this offense committed to Isiah Pacheco, that he is going to continue being the workhorse back in this offense. We just take a look at last year. He played 14 games. He was 7th in red zone touches, which is, kind of the added bonus of being the 3-down back in the Kansas City Chiefs offense. You know that they're going to be close to the red zone and to the end zone. So there's going to be scoring opportunities for the guy. He had 15 attempts per game last year, and his 17-game pace would have put him at 250 carries. So ultimate workhorse, you could say. He was 14th in expected fantasy points per game, 8th in opportunity share. He was 11th in breakaway run rate. So you are getting big playability with this guy too. And the next closest running back on the Chiefs last year had 70 carries. So it is, again, it is quite literally Isiah Pacheco. And Isiah Pacheco missed 3 games last year. And once he came back until the Super Bowl game against the 49ers, he was the running back 5 in expected fantasy points per game. This team just fully committed on to Isiah Pacheco and his skill set. The big question mark last year was the receiving work. Was it going to be there? What does it look like? And it turned out 44 receptions on 49 targets is pretty sufficient to, catapult him into the top 15 conversation. Now you just take a look at what's going into this year, right? They didn't bring anyone else in. The backup is CEH, and everyone should know that the Chiefs don't really want to use CEH as their lead back. So expect a heavy workload for Isiah Pacheco. Andy Reid was even asked, who's going to be third down back, the pass catching back, because that used to be Jerick McKinnon. He just flat out said, in many words, he essentially said that Isiah Pacheco is going to be the 3-down back because he understands pass protections. He understands the technique and the fundamentals that you need to have in all facets of the game. His route running and his hands. Isiah Pacheco has a massive opportunity this year, and for the price of running back 12, which is round 3, round 4 in your drafts this year, it is an easy smash pick for me this year.
For sure. Like you said, Jerick McKinnon leaving, that's 32 targets, 25 receptions, and 4 receiving touchdowns. That's just been vacated away. That just gives Pacheco that upside. If he's a guy, like you said, it would be surprising if we don't see at least 230 attempts, probably closer to that 250, maybe even reaching up to that 270 range, because he really is this entire backfield. And so he was like you said, 8th in opportunity share. So he was getting the opportunities already last year. It just looks like they're going to keep funneling him this way this year. So I really can't find any fault in that. And I've really come around on Pacheco too. He was kind of a guy I was out on, but like you said, he does the job right. And if the Chiefs trust him, why wouldn't you want a share of this Chiefs offense? And probably the only role that for sure outside of Mahomes and Kelsey, that is a for sure role that has guaranteed points to come.
Yeah, this role, or at least the situation for Isiah Pacheco, is very comparable to me at least, with Tony Pollard last year on the Cowboys, in the sense that everything is in front of Isiah Pacheco. And the only difference this year versus last year with Tony Pollard is, with Tony Pollard, you had to pay up. You had to pay a pretty penny for Tony Pollard. Mm-hmm. For Isiah Pacheco, he's pretty much going 2 rounds after where Tony Pollard was going last year. So you don't have to risk, substantial capital for a guy that, again, has quite literally everything in front of him this year.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, he's going end of the 3rd round, beginning of the 4th round, which is just crazy for a guy who's going as a top 12 running back. That just feels weird to say, but that's the way fantasy drafts have shifted. Speaking of a guy who I think is going later than I think a lot of people expected, That's my guy. And it's Travis Etienne, who's currently going as the running back 8. On Sleeper, it's a little more reasonable, right? He's going in that the end of the second, beginning of the third round. On Underdog and best ball drafts, he's going, you can sometimes get in the middle of the fourth round, which is crazy for a guy who was the running back 2 last year, or running back 3, excuse me. And he was running back 7 in points per game. In 2022, he had 220 rush attempts and 35 receptions for 5 touchdowns. Then last year, we saw him bump that all up, 267 attempts, 58 receptions, and 12 total touchdowns. The only difference was, and this was a little surprising to me, was that he went from 5.1 yards per carry down to 3.8. But when you realize he was also first in stuffed runs, and he had to be 4th in yards created to get there because Jacksonville had a bottom 3 offensive line, it starts to make a little bit more sense, right? If you watch that offensive line, Trevor Lawrence was getting killed if he wasn't moving quick. Etienne had a guy in his lap every time he touched the ball. It was rough. They did try to address some of it, adding Mitch Morse. The O-line's hopefully healthy. I'm not going to say they're all of a sudden a top 10 unit, but they shouldn't be third worst in the league anymore, is what I'm saying. It's not going to get worse. It can only really get better from what we saw last year. But like Pacheco, this is Etienne's backfield. Over 300 total touches last season, 6th in snap and opportunity share, 3rd in weighted opportunities, 4th in carries, and 7th in targets. He's going to continue to see this sort of volume. I think the worry is that with a healthy Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Brian Thomas, Gabe Davis, maybe the receptions come down a little bit, right? Because they're able to funnel. But I'm not expecting him to all of a sudden drop to below 40 receptions, right? We're expecting that to stay above that. And just where he's going in drafts is ridiculous to me. It's just, you're getting a workhorse at the end of the second, beginning of the third, and best ball sometimes in the middle of the fourth. And you just can't buy that, especially when he showed last year that he can handle that workload, right? He can score 12 touchdowns on an offense that we thought was sputtering, right? They weren't a great offense last year, and he still put up 12 touchdowns. So the efficiency will hopefully improve, and the volume should still continue to be there for Travis Etienne this year.
Yeah, Etienne, at least in best ball, is such a value that it feels like there's a crowd of people that doesn't really acknowledge what he did last year, and then there's a crowd of people that just say, like, I don't think Etienne is that good, or I don't think that Jacksonville will be that good. And the fact is that it doesn't necessarily matter, because when it comes to running backs, there is only one thing that really matters. It's volume.
Yep.
And that's what Etienne got last year. Again, we may not see 260 carries. We might not see close to 60 receptions. But if he's going to get you 230 rushing attempts, if he's going to give you 45 receptions, that is still a sizable workload to at least be close to where he's going in drafts this year. And I recently finished up my AFC South restatting and updated all of my projections for the Jaguars and the Texans, the Colts and the Titans and stuff. And when I got to Jacksonville, I had a moment where I was like, where are the touchdowns coming from in this offense? Because I wouldn't say that like Christian Kirk is a huge red zone threat. Maybe Evan Ingram can be that in this offense. I've never really thought of Gabe Davis, and I don't think Brian Thomas Jr. hits the ground running, but I also don't think that like Gabe Davis is like a huge red zone target. He's always been the big play guy. He's not necessarily the red zone guy. So then I'm staring at these stat projections and I'm like, who's going to score the touchdowns here? And I was like, you know what? It might be Etienne. And it may not be the prettiest, and it may not be the most efficient or straightforward way. But if he's going to give you 8, 9, 10 touchdowns with, again, the workload that you're going to get for a guy that is a workhorse in this Jacksonville offense, there really should be no reason why like he can't be at least a solid, a running back 1, a top 12 running back.
For sure. And if this offense does take any step forward, right, then we're all of a sudden you're looking at a guy who does have 12 to 15 touchdown upside. You're looking at a guy who could put up 1,700 total yards, right? And has that upside to finish, as a top 5 running back this season. So that's definitely not out of the realm of possibilities. That's also why, because that there is that upside that can come with the volume. Speaking of a guy who got insane volume when he was healthy last year, Ty, you're talking about a Rams running back, Kyren Williams. So why don't you just let the people know why they're maybe off for having Kyren as the running back 7 right now in drafts?
So it's not necessarily that I don't disagree with people as to why he is the running back 7, but where I have the issue is where people say he can finish lower than a running back 1 this year, that he can fall outside of the top 12 because of Blake Corum. That is quite literally the only argument that people can make. And yes, there is all the arguments that come with Blake Corum, right? Like the training camp buzz is that that Blake Corum is actually very good at pass protection, so he might find his way onto passing downs. That they spent substantial capital on him. But the thing is, even if Blake Corum starts to eat away at Kyren's workload that we saw last year, that ultimately landed him as the running back 2 in points per game. If Corum takes enough away to, let's say, take away 3 points per game from Kyren last year. Again, just a reminder, 21 fantasy points per game was what he was at last year. That puts him at 18. Last year, that still would have been the running back 3. Okay. Let's say he takes away 6. Or sorry, let's say he takes away 5. So then he's at 16 fantasy points per game. He still would have been the running back 8. So you can look at this in one of two ways. One, that the workload that is Kyren Williams' workload last year is just massive, that no matter what Blake Corum can take away from Kyren Williams, that he's still going to actually be a very, very solid fantasy, producer for your team. But I think the best way to say it is that the running back 7 price tag that you have to pay on Kyren Williams already accounts for Blake Corum potentially taking away some work. So again, that's where I don't necessarily agree with the people that think that he can finish outside of the top 12 because of Blake Corum, because that's what's already driven into his price tag, while having like contingent upside that Kyren, that Blake Corum actually doesn't play a massive role in this offense in year 1, and that Kyren Williams could end up being another top 3 or having another top 3 running back season. So the price tag may feel rich to some people on the surface, but rest assured, it really isn't. And that he is one of the best picks in the 2nd and 3rd rounds, because you're not getting, dare I say, running back 1 upside in any of the running backs that are going in round 2 or round 3.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we forget how good he was last year because he came out of nowhere, right? He had 6 top 5 finishes in PPR formats. When he came back from injury week 12 on, he had 1 game with less than 20 touches. He had at least 100 total yards in each game. He had, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 total touchdowns, in 6 games. So the dude was on fire all season long. They used him like crazy. So like you said, if Corum does come in and chip into that a little bit, we're going to probably see Pacheco type numbers from Kyren Williams is kind of what he's going to fall to, which is pretty insane to say. I will say the caveat, and I am a little worried about this. It's the same reason I'm a little worried about Etienne, is he is an undersized back. We're talking about a guy, who's, I think he's 5'7", 190. Is that what he came in at? It was something small like that. I know. And so there is a little bit of concern around that. But like you said, okay, you knock him down. Maybe you're worried about injury risk, and that's really the only reason you can knock him. When he was on the field, they used him a ton. And in that last stretch, he never had a game of under 4 yards per attempt. And he had 3 games over 5 yards per attempt. So he was a guy who was efficient when he touched the ball too. So I just don't see it all of a sudden becoming like a 50-50 split. Like, this is Kyren's backfield until proven otherwise.
Yeah, the reason why they brought in Blake Corum is just because they saw a similar skill set, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Blake Corum automatically gets snaps. Because if that was the case, we would have seen Kyren Williams in his rookie year. That's just not how it operates. And for, I don't want to call the Blake Corum pick like an injury, insurance policy pick, but that's kind of what it was, because there's no way that a guy like Kyren Williams, kind of to your caution about his size and stuff, there's no way that a guy like Kyren Williams can handle the workload that he got last year after year after year. And I don't think there's many running backs that can, right? So again, I don't want to call Blake Corum, an injury, insurance pick, because he's much better than just an insurance pick. But why would anything really change for Kyren Williams? Maybe, again, I kind of drew the analogy. I want to say, was it the mock draft? Maybe it was our live draft that we did last night, where I said, if you were to just say like 100% is the workload that Kyren got last year, or, and Blake Corum takes away 20% of that, that's still 80% still for Kyren Williams. And based on what we had saw last year and just points per game and stuff, kind of what I had alluded to at the beginning, Kyren can still be a top 5 running back, even with Corum taking some snaps, some touches, receptions away from him.
For sure. I mean, this was a team too. You have Royce Freeman had 77 carries. Ryan Rivers had 32. Darrell Henderson had 46. So, you start to combine a lot of that. You could easily see, Corum still see 140 carries next season. And it really isn't affecting Kyren Williams all that much. We're going to stay with the undersized back theme here, and I'm going to transition us over to Buffalo, and we're going to talk about Mr. James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. And he's a guy, I think, that a lot of people, I feel like a lot of people are actually pretty torn on James Cook. I feel like everybody really wants to like James Cook, but you have a big Josh Allen problem there, right? That's kind of what it feels like. And last season, Josh Allen had 15 rushing touchdowns. Him and Jalen Hurts were tied for the NFL record by a quarterback in a season with 15 rushing touchdowns. That is an insane number to hit as a quarterback. And if you were a James Cook manager, you felt that, because Cook only ended with 6 total touchdowns, right? He was 4th in rushing yards. He was 8th in receiving yards among running backs. And yet you were kind of left like, man, what could have been with James Cook, where he was the running back 12 and he was the running back 15 in points per game. So, there's just something left to be desired last year for James Cook. However, I think that's okay for where he's going at the running back 14, because the volume feels pretty solid again this season. He had 240 attempts last year, 44 receptions, and he had 4.7 yards per carry, which is good for 1,100 yards, 1,500 total yards. He was only 23rd in snap share, only played 55% of snaps. So it's not like you're expecting him to be out there every second of every game. But the big thing for James Cook is in week 11, when Joe Brady took over, he was all of a sudden, averaging 19 touches per game. At the same time we saw Stephon Diggs phase out, we all of a sudden saw Brady really, start to rely on Cook. And so even if, they take, like you said, take some of that volume away and give it to Ray Davis, who's now there, you're okay with that, because James Cook was just as efficient, and you're not relying on James Cook to score touchdowns. That's not what you're relying on. But if you look at this offense, and Josh Allen comes down from 15 rushing touchdowns to a more, normal number for a quarterback, like 9, or his career average of 7, that all of a sudden you're opening up 6 to 8 rushing touchdowns, or 6 to 8 touchdowns in general, that are up for grabs, that, James Cook could go up, and if he hits 8 touchdowns, that's a fantastic year for James Cook. And that's just what you're acknowledging. So I guess really my argument for Cook is that the volume's going to be there, and he's going late enough in drafts where you're okay not having that touchdown upside, where you're going, okay, week to week, he's actually going to be pretty consistent, because I'm not reliant on the touchdown this week.
James Cook is, if you didn't take James Cook, I definitely would have talked about him, because I don't understand what it is that people have an issue with when it comes to James Cook. They might point out the size, they might point out the lack of touchdowns, maybe not the most hyper efficient back. But again, the last time I checked, volume is king when it comes to running backs, and especially for these running backs that do get a sizable receiving workload. And that's what James Cook has had, or at least got last year. And you take a look at all the people that left, like we've said this plenty of times, no more Stephon Diggs, no more Gabe Davis. You brought in Curtis Samuel, Keon Coleman. That's it. Yeah. So there's an opportunity for James Cook to get even more receiving work with the rushing workload that he probably will still have. Like, again, he's not the biggest guy, but I really don't think that Ray Davis is going to start vulturing carries away from James Cook, especially during at least from the training camp portion of things so far. Ray Davis has had a bunch of fumbling issues. That's not going to get him on the field anytime soon. So, I think I phrased it one way earlier. I think actually this was when we were going over our top 30 running backs while you were on your unlimited PCO. If you're in on Alvin Kamara, which may not be that many people, but if you are, you should also be in on James Cook, because again, they are going to get meaningful touches and a lot of them. So I love James Cook this year, again, at the running back 14 after being the running back 12 last year, with little to no change in at least the running back room and what the run game will be. You already know that he's not going to be the most, efficient. You know that he's not going to put up massive touchdown numbers. I get it's not, maybe that limits the ceiling on the guy, but you know that his floor is going to be pretty safe. And I don't think there's anything wrong when you're looking for floor guys, right? And like everyone wants to avoid the dead zone running backs and all those kind of things. I don't think there's anything wrong with going with the guy that has at least the most straightforward path to getting a ton of touches and meaningful touches in that dead zone range of your drafts.
For sure. And that's the thing. And like you said, he's going almost in the 5th round. So it's not like you're giving up one of these top picks. So when you can draft him with that understanding of, hey, I just want him to be a solid running back too. That's what he's going to give you, and he's going to give it to you pretty consistently. This team was also 5th in rush attempts last year. And with what you said about removing Stephon Diggs, removing Gabe Davis, and you replace him with Keon Coleman and Curtis Samuel, that doesn't scream to me that all of a sudden we're going to go and be really pass heavy this year, right? That screams to me, hey, we're going to kind of keep doing some of the same, especially during the season. And, that's not, I don't even think it's going to change later in the year. That's going to be the game plan of let's just run it down your throats. And, if we need Josh Allen to make a special play here and there, we'll kind of pick our spots with it. But that's kind of how the team ran last year. And I really don't see that change at all this year.
Oh, there are 283 vacated targets at the wide receiver position in this offense. Curtis Samuel and Keon Coleman are not going to see 140 targets each.
Yeah.
And now I think a lot of people expect Dalton Kincaid to get a bit of a increase in targets. So some of those might filter down to him. And after that, you're then kind of you're looking at Khalil Shakir, James Cook, Dawson Knox, MVS, Mac Hollins. Those are all of the players remaining that could get an uptick in targets. And I guarantee, guarantee is strong. But the player that's going to be on the field the most, the player that has a starting role in the offense already, is going to be the guy first on that list that does get some of that kind of trickle down of extra targets.
For sure. All righty, let's take a quick break before we hit our last 2 running backs and hear from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, where it is best ball summer. There are 5 core best ball tournaments to play in with over $20 million up for grabs this summer. You can even take a crack at winning the top prize of $1.5 million in their infamous Best Ball Mania 5 contest. To enter, head to underdogfantasy.com or download the app and use the code FELLAS to get a first deposit bonus up to $250 and our 2024 draft guide for free. Again, head to underdogfantasy.com or download the app and use code FELLAS to sign up. Must be 18 plus and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-522-4700 or visit npcgambling.org.
And we're back with two more running backs. And Ty and I decided over the break, 2 running backs isn't enough. We'll give you 4 bonus guys going later in rounds. That's what we decided because we're feeling so generous today. And we realized we are absolutely cruising through this episode and we were going to be done a little early. So we'll give you some bonus content if you want to stick around after these next 2. But Tyler, you're going to talk about a guy that we actually haven't talked much about at all this offseason. So I'm really interested in what you have to say. And I'm not going to spoil it. I'll let you kind of intro this guy the way that you want to intro him.
Yeah, this guy, he's a relatively new draft target of mine. It's Ken Walker. He is, I think, the definition of like the most, or the guy that you just do not get excited about at all if you were to take him in your draft. I will say this about Ken Walker. Like, I didn't have a problem with him before, but what I've come around on when it comes to Ken Walker is that his upside, his upside is pretty big in this offense. Per Albert Breer, who goes around to all the NFL team training camps and does takeaways and stuff like that. When he was in Seattle, he wrote this in his takeaway article. To the new staff, he looks like the kind of back you can play on all 3 downs and build a running game around. Hold up. Hold on a minute.
Hold up.
You say 3 down back? Hello. That is some strong language for a guy in Ken Walker that we have never really thought of as a massive, receiving threat. As a guy that could be a 3-down back like he was his rookie season, but that's because there was no one else. And then last year we got Zach Charbonnet in the mix, but for Charbonnet to go into year 2, Ken Walker to go into year 3 with the new coaching staff, and they see 3-down back potential in the guy. That's pretty big in my opinion. So you know what the workload was going to be already with Ken Walker. He was going to get 210, 220, 230 carries somewhere in there, right? The early down guy. But you mix in a little more receiving work because he might be on the field on more 3rd downs than we've seen in the past, where in his last 2 seasons, he had 27, 29 receptions. We bumped that up to 35. We bumped that up to 40 even on just on the off chance that he hits 40. And again, with his rushing ability and the volume that he gets, why can't this guy suddenly push top 12? Why can't he be kind of a low-end running back 1? Ken Walker was the running back 11 in expected fantasy points before suffering his oblique injury in the middle of the season. But he still finished the year after coming back from his injury 2nd in missed tackles forced per touch. We know how dynamic of a runner he is, the ability that he has to break off a big one at any given moment. Now you pair that up with a Ryan Grubb offense that likes to utilize 3 wide receiver sets. You know what that forces defenses to do? Cover more of the field. You're not able to play 7 in the box all the time. You might have to go more nickel. You might have to go more 5-6 defensive back looks, which means lighter fronts for the running backs. That just plays right into Ken Walker, into his skill set and his ability to make big plays in the run game. So he's not, I wouldn't say that Ken Walker is a guy that I'm absolutely taking in every single draft. But if I'm looking for a running back 2 that's got some sneaky good upside here, and I'm missing out on the James Cooks of the world. I'm missing out on the Alvin Kamara's of the world. I think Ken Walker is a great option. So like I said at the very top, he's a relatively new draft target of mine. But man, I don't know what it is, but I am coming around very, very quickly on Ken Walker.
So I don't want to say this because I don't want to ruin your parade, but to me, he is a better Miles Sanders on a worse team. Is the way I view Ken Walker. And I am talking. His upside is 2022 Miles Sanders, when Sanders had 1,200 yards and 11 rushing touchdowns, but only put up, 25 receptions for 100 and something yards. That's just where I see it. I'm just calling it how I see it. I haven't come around to Ken Walker. I understand what you're saying. Home run guy. I think he's a phenomenal back. My worry is that Zach Charbonnet is going to be too included in the passing game for Walker to truly have running back one upside. That's my worry. Like I understand where you're at, but that is my concern with Kenneth Walker.
Are you sure about that?
I am sure about that. I didn't want to say it. It was hard for me to say, but I did. I didn't want to rain on the parade, but that is where I'm at with Kenneth Walker.
Dude, just absolute buzzkill of the century when it comes to my take. But I have to say though, that is in the range of outcomes for Ken Walker.
100%.
Like there is no there. Once you get into this, running back 16 to 24 mix of running backs, there is quite literally no sure thing. Like each guy, I might just pull up just kind of current ADP and consensus ADP and just kind of run through the guy like Alvin Kamara. On the chance that Kendre Miller gets more involved, which doesn't seem likely because Dennis Allen seems to just take unnecessary shots at him any chance that he gets at a press conference. Aaron Jones getting up there in age, can he stay healthy? And a Vikings offense that did not really support any good running back play last year.
Yeah.
James Conner, his injury status and history. DeAndre Swift. Are we sure with how many receiving weapons that they've got? David Montgomery feels pretty safe, but there's really the upside is really capped with David Montgomery. Ramondre Stevenson. I mean, if you're going to follow the money, you can, but it's a New England offense. Najee Harris. I don't know if you've looked at the stats and the efficiency metrics, but it's been going just straight down over the last 2 seasons. And then you're looking at Zamir White, which like that could pay off. But at the same time, like we're talking about a guy that went in the 4th or 5th round of the 2022 draft. Like there's no sure thing in this range of running backs. So I will disagree on where you stand in terms of how in or out you are on Kenneth Walker, but it has to be said that that's within the range of outcomes.
So it does make me feel a little better when you kind of work to the tier. My only concern is just that he's at the front of that tier, right? So he would need to kind of bounce up. And like you said, if they truly do feel like he's a 3-down back and he gets more receiving work, that's what would push him forward, right? Because we know he can do it on the ground. We know he can find the end zone. It's just, can he get the receiving work to go along with it? So I understand the argument from that perspective. And, that's truly just making your call in the preseason of, I'm buying into the hype that we're going to see more receiving work from Kenneth Walker. I'm not quite there yet, but if you are there, then he is in that next tier, and then he's the lowest running back in that tier. That's kind of how I feel like you got to gauge him, going into your drafts. Speaking of a guy with receiving upside for sure, Mr. Jaylen Warren definitely has receiving upside. Last season, he had 60 receptions. He only had 150 carries, but compared to Najee Harris, Najee had 255 attempts, but only 29 receptions. So Najee was a guy who, at the beginning of his career, we were like, oh, he gets all this receiving work. Jaylen Warren comes in and they're like, this guy's a little more efficient, a little better, more exciting with the ball in his hands. Let's get him open in space. Also last season, Jaylen Warren, 5.3 yards per carry compared to Najee Harris, who had 4.06, which by the way was a career high for Najee, which is pretty ridiculous to me. That is his career high is a 4.06 yards per carry. Last season, Steelers were 9th in rush attempts. their new OC, Arthur Smith, was calling plays for the Falcons, who were third in rush attempts. So if you're like, ooh, you know what, maybe rush attempts are going to take a step back. No, they're probably not, especially with Russell Wilson or Justin Fields at the helm. They'll probably only increase is kind of where we're going to see that go. And this guy was electric on the field. He was third in yards created per touch, fifth in evaded tackles, first in juke rate, eighth in breakaway runs, and seventh in yards per touch. And when you compare that to Najee Harris, he looked like a completely different back. When you watch them go in, it kind of felt similar, but I think it was even more apparent than the Alexander Madison, Ty Chandler, where you watch Madison or Najee and you're like, well, that kind of stunk to watch. And then you watch the other guy, Chandler Warren, come in, you're like, why are they not in all the time? And so part of it just has to do with size, with the way that teams, run their offenses. But Warren is similar to James Cook in the fact you're really not going to expect a ton of touchdowns from him, right? He only had 4 touchdowns. He was still the running back, 29 points per game. This year he goes as the running back, 32. He gets a guy who has shown, over the, last year was like, hey, I'm going to run a split backfield. So if we can see Warren move that 150 attempts up to 180, we could see a similar season to. So I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to back off of it, and you're going to. So don't hate on me for this take. We could see a similar season to Jahmyr Gibbs, but he's not going to get the same touchdown upside in the fact that he could have 180 attempts for 900 plus yards, 60 receptions for 400 plus yards. It just won't be the touchdowns. If you look at Jahmyr Gibbs' season last year, that was his stat line. If Warren sees 30 more attempts this season, if he sees 2 more per game, he's going to have the same stat line or a very similar stat line to Jahmyr Gibbs. It's just he's not going to see 11 touchdowns like Gibbs saw. And that'll be the difference. That'll be a 4-point per game difference in fantasy. Like, right, we're talking Gibbs had 17 points per game. Warren will be closer to 13. But that is kind of the area we're talking about with Jaylen Warren. If he can see that, upping in times. This look you're giving me is ridiculous, because I know it sounds ridiculous, but if you look at their 2 stat lines, the only difference was the touchdowns and the fact that Gibbs had 30 more attempts, which, obviously Gibbs is a better running back. He deserves those. And the touchdowns are going to come for Gibbs, where they're not going to necessarily come for Warren, especially between their offenses they're in. I'm just saying we could see very similar, just with a little less touchdown upside.
So I like the value with Jaylen Warren this year, just because, again, it seems like the most likely outcome is that he's pushing top 24, kind of finishing closer to 20 than he is to 30. And I wanted to kind of double check like the history of running back receptions, or at least targets, with Russell Wilson. Because I still want to say that Russell Wilson will be the week 1 starter for the Steelers. Now, this could all change if it's Justin Fields that's the starter, but last year, Jaleel McLaughlin, Samaje Perine, and Javonte Williams all combined for 150 targets. So Russ doesn't really have a problem with like kind of checking the ball down. Now, not all running back targets are created the same, but that's pretty substantial, right? Like, so it's not that like that Jaylen Warren is in an offense or with a quarterback that won't, check the ball down like a Jalen Hurts does or someone like that. Maybe it's the Arthur Smith factor that just keeps me scared. It keeps me away at an arm's distance. But the fact is, the strength of this Pittsburgh team will be the rushing game. And sure, Najee, I feel like what we saw last year could very well happen again this year, where Najee is that kind of low end running back 2, might give you some really good weeks where he's kind of where he's going to finish as closer to a top 15 running back on the week. But Jaylen Warren could also give you that same kind of upside week to week, while going quite literally, where is it? The 7.6, the 9.2, a round and a half after Najee. So the Gibbs argument got me kind of confused for a second. But it, like, I feel
I'm
like
just comparing stat lines.
that's all I'm doing. I'm just looking at the numbers, bro. But again, like, I don't think there's like Jaylen Warren, and I think this is why you and I would say like we like drafting him is because of the cost, because of his ADP. He's a running back 32. You can take him as your running back 3, and if you get him as your running back 4, that's even better, right? Like with his upside, range of outcomes, all that stuff, with his skill set in an Arthur Smith offense that, let's be honest, like might just utilize the most efficient back. It's a great pick this year.
For sure. And like I said, I mean, he's because of that touchdown difference, it's like the Walmart Jahmyr Gibbs. That's what you're getting. But you're paying Walmart price right at the running back 32 compared to in the second round. So that is why we like Gibbs. But Ty, let's give these people some rapid fire 1 minute per player late round guys that you like. I'll let you go first with yours.
So my first one I've talked about before, and it is Rico Dowdle. Lucas brought this up in our mock draft episode of just what if Zeke is now at the point where it's, not to say that he's too old, but what if this backfield is slightly favored towards Rico Dowdle over Ezekiel Elliott? Might be one of the weirdest situations that we have, but it could be it's a possibility. So we all project this Dallas offense to be one of the highest scoring offenses to run the most plays. So the opportunity that Rico Dowdle will have this year, and again, for what is it over on Sleeper, his ADP running back 47 at the beginning of the 13th round. Yeah, that's a really easy flyer to take.
For sure. My first guy, Julian McLaughlin. And what you're hoping for is almost similar to like 2020 JD McKissick, where just the targets are ridiculous. I mean, McKissick that year saw 110 targets. I'm not saying McLaughlin's going to come out and see 110 targets, but he's in an offense that utilizes the running back. Like you said, 150 targets last year among all those guys. He is going to be the receiving back. And Bo Nix is a quarterback coming out of college who's known for checking the ball down to his running back. So if McLaughlin can continue to find his way on the field, even while Williams is healthy, I think he could have a role to fantasy relevance despite going as the running back 52 currently.
Sorry, I was muted. I wasn't ready for you to be finished.
Caribou, not a sponsor.
Caribou, not a sponsor, but I'm just enjoying my nice iced coffee over here. My second sleeper, though, or at least like flyer guy that I like taking a shot on at the end of drafts, also a relatively new guy. It's J.K. Dobbins. Not sexy, not one that you're like, oh, I'm super pumped that I got J.K. Dobbins. But on the chance that it's him and Gus Edwards that lead this backfield, for the running back 45 price tag at the end of the 12th round. Again, this is just another one of those flyers that you take on a guy. You're not going to watch the Chargers games this year. You're not going to watch J.K. Dobbins, but on the chance that he gets you 13 carries, gets you 60 yards, and he finds the end zone on a random day, maybe he adds in like 2-3 receptions on the off chance. Tell me who out of these guys after J.K. Dobbins has that kind of week-to-week upside. Kendre Miller. No. Marshawn Lloyd. Maybe not right away. Tyler Algier. No.
Need an injury probably.
Right. There's on the contingency, maybe. Antonio Gibson. No, I don't think so. Kamani Vidal, who's going to be the backup in the if it's J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, probably not. Tyrone Tracy, no. Like,
yeah,
there are very few guys that have a situation like J.K. Dobbins that are going as late as he is.
Yeah, I mean Dobbins is just one of those guys that you just want to work out. You just do.
Yeah,
It's just sucked watching how many injuries he's had. And then the final guy we'll talk about is Ty Chandler. We've talked about him a couple times. I just brought him up on this show. He is one of those guys that's being drafted as a true handcuff that could end up having standalone value as the year goes on. Aaron Jones is at the time of his career where he probably isn't going to handle 250 carries. They have either Sam Darnold or JJ McCarthy, running the show. So Chandler's going to need to be more involved. You're hoping he can find a Jaylen Warren type role that Warren was in last season, which I don't think is out of the realm of possibilities. More than likely, it feels like at this point in Aaron Jones' career, he's going to miss 3 or 4 games. Ty Chandler steps in, takes over the backfield in that case. I think, they still could bring somebody in when Aaron Jones misses time, but Chandler's, he's the main guy at that point. And from what we've seen from Chandler, he's been dynamic. He's explosive. He's fun to watch. He's good in the passing game. So he brings fantasy upside. But yeah, that wraps up. We started with 6. We ended it with 10, Ty. So, the people were in for a treat today. That's all I can say. I don't know. I think I'm trying to redeem myself from the mock draft where I attacked the people. Now I'm trying to come back and be on the people's side.
Well, he's trying to be the baby face now, and I don't think that's how it works. But hey, we'll let the people decide that one.
Well, see, that might be how it is just for August. Is the Tuesday mock draft? I'm the heel, and then I come back baby face for the next 2.
Everything else.
Yes. But this is not our last podcast episode of the week. We have one coming out tomorrow, talking about 9 wide receivers we can't stop drafting because Lucas will be on with us. I know. So maybe it's not worth watching. Maybe I'm just definitely be worth watching because I will be on it, and Ty will be there too. So it'll be worth it talking wide receivers. We got shorts coming out. Tyler's doing a how to draft. I got safest and riskiest picks. Lucas has got a how to draft short coming up because we are in full content mode through the rest of the season. So we're really heating up, Ty, and I think we're getting excited. Anything that people need to know before we do our goodbyes and log off?
As you've heard us say many, many a time, we are doing our draft guide giveaway through the rest of August. So all you got to do, make sure that you are subscribed to the new podcast channel, The Fantasy Football Fellows, which will be linked in the description below. So you subscribe to the new channel. You comment below on this video, quite literally anything you want. You could say, what's up? You could say, Tyler, I think that your facial hair needs to get shaved off. You could literally tell Cam, like, you agree with all of his takes, which I know you won't, but just saying, you could literally comment anything you want, and that enters you into the giveaway, and then we will choose a winner at the end of the week. Or if you want, sorry, do you like how I just went right through?
Brutal. I'm on the show. You're not supposed to throw a shot, but that's all right.
But if you want another way of getting the draft guide for free, all you got to do is use the code FELLAS over on Underdog Fantasy. All of these guys that we talked about, we are big fans of, even in best ball. They've got a lot of redraft value, but we have been drafting a ton over on Underdog, and we love the values that these guys are all going at over on Underdog. So again, all you got to do is use the code FELLAS over on Underdog, and you will get our draft guide for free. Free.
Nothing better than that. That's all I'm going to say.
$3.03 is music to everyone's ears.
Exactly. So make sure you follow us, Fantasy Football Fellas, on YouTube and TikTok, or also Fantasy Football Fellas Shorts, because if you're watching on this, you have to be watching on Fantasy Football Fellas at YouTube now, because it's the only place we're posting for the rest of time. For our long-form content, Shorts will still be a Fantasy Football Fellas Shorts. The FFL is on Instagram, FFFellas on Twitter. I'm at CamelFFF on Twitter if you want to follow me. We got at Tyler _Plath, over on Twitter if you want to follow Tyler. He's a great follow over there. But yeah, we will see you tomorrow for wide receivers we can't stop drafting, and deuces.